Thank you so much, Vincenzo, for coming along to talk about the amazing Trieste mental health community services. But also I understand you have a personal sort of background there. You were a service user as a teenager, and perhaps you could talk about that, but also give a history of the amazing history of why a whole city has abolished psychiatric wards.
Yes, so Trieste hasn't abolished psychiatric wards completely. There's a small general hospital ward still. However, this ward has 6 beds, almost never full, and people stay there very brief periods of times. And there's no locked doors and there's no restraint in that ward. But in essence, I think it's about something like 20 people per year that get involuntary admitted for brief periods of time in this ward. But the entire system is basically in the community, including in places with beds, in homely environments. So let's say I qualified as a psychologist in Trieste. That doesn't mean the same thing as clinical psychologist in the UK. It's a bit more like assistant psychologist. So how did this come about? Basically, in the 60s and 70s, a movement developed in Italy that later took the name of democratic psychiatry. The leader of this movement was a psychiatrist called Franco Basaglia. Now, obviously, I'm telling you this story. This is my perception of the story. I'm not even either talking in the name of services in Trieste or anything. I'm just telling you the way I made sense of things and my experience. But anyway, Basaglia worked initially in a small asylum in Gorizia, a very small town, not too far from Trieste, to be fair. And in this place was run with strongly institutional rules. So the focus of the whole service, of the whole system, was about the efficiency of the procedures and making sure that everything functioned, basically. And what this meant is that people's pain, people's suffering was only seen in terms of disruption, in terms of risk to the running of the institution. And so if people were misbehaving or rebelling, there would be, for example, electroshock treatment to kind of terrify them into submission, and the doors were locked. It was an environment that Basaglia and others working with him compared to concentration camps. So Basaglia was completely rejecting that approach, and I thought that institution shouldn't exist, that we should help people differently. So what he tried to do, and what he did, was overturn the logic of the asylum. So setting up meetings where people could question psychiatrists, people in power, and patients, service users, however we want to call them, could have a voice, could let's say, talk about how they felt, what they wanted to see, and gain more power. Now, this was largely, let's say, something that Basaglia brought in from the UK, from therapeutic communities that were very important in the UK, especially in the 50s and 60s, and were kind of presented as a revolutionary way of seeing asylums, where people could question each other and could be an open communication. Basaglia started to open the doors of the asylums, and he noticed that as he was opening the doors and as he was democratizing the asylum, people started to present differently, less severely. And he thought, well, if they've taught me in university to believe that there's a very strict kind of presentation that the schizophrenic person has, that the there's this fixed presentation of people. And I see that actually when I start changing the way the environment presents, then people start behaving differently. What do I do with all of this knowledge that I have? It's clear that we need to redesign everything, rethink the whole system. So a lot of people came from all over the world to Gorizia to see how this was done, and they were quite inspired. But Basaglia wanted to go well beyond that, well beyond opening the asylum and having a an institution that was kind of, yes, therapeutic in the sense of democratic, but didn't change the power dynamics of exclusion that brought people in the asylum in the first place.
It's amazing. That's an amazing big story. And it's almost the sense that the locked doors, when they were opened up opportunities for new relationships, more personal, therapeutic relationships. It's such a fascinating history. I mean, your personal one, that we have little time, but in a sense of, how do you think Chester Mental Health Service would, I'm going to focus in on people who have psychosis, with experience of psychosis. How do you think the mental health services in Trieste would help someone in crisis on a personal level, on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, so this question helps me to link to the next step in the story. So Basaglia then moved to Trieste and went a step further, said it's not enough to help people have their voice within a separated institution, but people need to be helped to link into the community. We need to find ways for madness and sanity, which can't be really separated one from another. It's a very contradictory concept, madness, illness, pain. How can we find a way to dialectically make these different experiences coexist so that nobody excludes these people somewhere else? And this is the work that was done and is still done in Trieste. So trying to, for example, I was a member of a group of volunteers, and we used to go on holiday together. Now, obviously, if somebody's in a severe state of psychosis, it's difficult to go on holiday. But the idea is there is a lot of opportunity for human connection that comes from moving away from your pain seen exclusively as a risk or as a disruption that needs to be controlled, but that's something that has a range of meanings, including, if we want, danger and disruption and all the negative things. But there's a lot of potential for growth in your experience. It has a meaning, and we can't capture this meaning within a building. So this was something specifically Basalian, different from other approaches. If you're bullied, if you're a victim of racism, we can't just say, well, we'll let the bullies continue as they were in the class, and we'll just put you in another place where we'll treat you well. We need to have a discussion about our community, about the society. We need to find a way to exist together, basically. So this was my, yeah.
That's a fascinating answer. And I think the sense of opportunities just for growth, personal development, the opposite of locking someone up, really.
Yes, I think that part of this was also the fact that experience was not something that was something of medical competence, so that the doctor could tell you what your experience is and what it means and what you need to do. And to recover, I'm going to send shocks through your head. Electroshock was an invention of Italian traditional psychiatry, so it was alongside the locked doors a big symbol of traditional psychiatry in Italy. So it's no longer that I'm making you do things, that I'm doing things to you to make you recover, but you're the protagonist as a person of your recovery, and I'm helping you to become part of the community so that you can find your own way to make sense of your experience.
Thank you, Vincenzo. We've got very little time. You now actually work, I understand, you've got this fantastic podcast. What do you call your podcast?
It's called A Place of Safety with a question mark. Not a safe place. People always look for a safe place. It's not a safe place. It's a place of safety question mark.
Okay. In the 1 or 2 minutes left, you how do you contrast the United Kingdom's NHS mental health services with Trieste?
Well, I mean, I've worked in a crisis team for a year and a half, so I've had experience of that. I think that in very brief terms, probably the main difference at the heart of everything is that in the UK, there doesn't tend to be a lot of questioning in the service, in the system. So a lot of ideas and procedures are presented as best practice or evidence-based with the assumption that they're objective. And Basaglia fundamentally questioned the fact that the idea of an objective science and that evidence-based would solve human contradictions. He thought that science is often used to defend power structures, and we need to understand what we're measuring and why, and what role this has. So there's not much of a debate in services in the UK. Whereas in Trieste, I could constantly disagree with my supervisors, have questions. And that's how I learned things, like disagreeing with people and having conversations. That's very difficult in the UK.
It does seem, if you go into a psychiatric ward and the mental health services, a very strict hierarchy from the psychiatrist.
Yeah, the functioning of the ward is what's really important.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We actually finished. That was fascinating. Really good to hear you. And just to recommend everybody to visit. You've got so many conversations about best practice United Kingdom.
Yes. And follow me on Twitter @APOS Podcast.
Okay. Thanks, Vincenzo.
Thank you.